still believe we have the greatest nation in all the world. Also, it has been my privilege to serve God's people since 1940. My great-grandmother, the day before I left for basic training, said, "If you'll make a good soldier for Jesus, you'll make a great soldier for our country." I've never forgotten that in serving God's people in the pastoral role and also our nation. I served our nation during great stress with Russia. President Kennedy and President Khrushchev got into a situation where we could have easily gone to war with the missiles in Cuba. I was in Thule, Greenland, and in that Cold War, literally there, 24 hours of darkness from April to back to November, and minus 40 degrees temperature. God was preparing me to preach the gospel, but I did not know it. My job was guarding B-52s who are still flying out of Knoxville, McGee-Tyson Airport. Their pilots, and in the heat of that battle with Russia, with great tensions, we had bombers loaded with bombs for Moscow and Leningrad. Well, President Kennedy, he overcame Khrushchev with his political genius as president of our country.
Being a young fella, I was under conviction when I was in service. I came home one time, and in young high school, a young football star had a revival. His person, we called him Red Kelly, and he had the gym. And I went to that revival in the back of the stadium, and up on the top floor here, I accepted Christ. I was tired of going to bed every night and thinking if I didn't wake up, I'd go to hell. And it just made me have to take charge of myself and make a decision. I had to make a choice one way or the other. Naturally, like everybody, you take Christ, but we put him down instead of him, and then we pick him up for a good many years there as an insurance policy when I needed him, you know. But along the years you develop.
I was a Christian. We were brought up in church, and I looked to God every night for his safekeeping, and I think that's what sustained me down through the time I was in service. I was always looking to God for help, and he helped me all the way through.
I remember having devotions, and Airman William Deasy read from the book of Romans, and we had the freedom to worship Jesus in basic training. My base commander, Major Earl Ray, he allowed me to get out 3 months early to pursue at Carson Newman University now what God was calling me to do. And the faith in the Air Force during the 50s and 60s was so free-oriented, and reading the Bible and listening to the message from God through the chaplains. And I just appreciate our country for giving us that freedom. And I'm only here today because of the sacrifices of men who are veterans, some in heaven and some will, with us, for that great ultimate sacrifice they made.
From 1959 until April of 1975, the Vietnam War raged. It was the prolonged struggle between nationalist forces attempting to unify the country of Vietnam under a communist government and the United States with the aid of the South Vietnamese attempting to stop the spread of communism. Many men and women in our church engaged in this harsh battle that defined the Vietnam War.
I grew up during the time of the Vietnam War, and during that time, young men between the ages of 17 and 27 had to register for the draft, which was a system the government had in place to pull a bunch of young men together for the war effort. And as long as you remained in school, you were okay. High school, you were safe all the way through high school unless you dropped out, or college, you were safe for the 4 years unless you were failing. And then Uncle Sam would come and get you and give you your greetings and salutations. But I wanted a choice. My parents wanted me to go on to college, and I figured, well, sooner or later, either I graduate from college and go into the service, why not do it right out of high school? And I narrowed it down to two services, the Air Force and the Army. The Air Force and the Navy. And my wife of 44 years said that if I joined the Navy, there wouldn't be any weddings. So that narrowed it down even further to just the Air Force. And I spent a little over 20 years in the Air Force. I enjoyed the whole 20 years. We moved quite a bit. About every 7 to 9 months we moved. Never stayed in any one place for any length of time. My most memorable time wasn't really service connected. One of the times that is very precious to me, I was an Air Force recruiter, and I loved helping young people make up their minds as to what they wanted to do, whether it was to come into the service or not. But some of them I directed on to college, others came into the service. My most significant memory is during this time when I was in recruiting, my wife and I, we had 4 children of our own, and we decided to get into foster care. And for the next 13 years, my wife and I raised 35 children besides our own. I felt such a calling from God to do that. And it was the year of the child when we got into it. I can't remember quite what year that was. It was back in the 1980s, early to mid 1980s, somewhere around there. But that was the most significant memory that I have during my service years of helping young people make up their mind and the children that we help raise and get out of horrible situations.
I was a medic for the 8th Tactical Fighter Squadron, which was one of several units attached to the 49th Tactical Fighter Wing. We were based, our home base was in Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. The deployment of our unit while I was on active duty was to support our allies in Europe. I was one of 2 medics assigned to the 8th Tactical Fighter Squadron, and when the unit deployed and went somewhere, we went with them. When I wasn't deployed, I literally worked in a base hospital where I assisted in the delivery of babies, and I supervised a heart clinic.
It was something else. I tell you, from somebody that was an old redneck from Kodak that hadn't been out of the county hardly, when you leave, you take a tour of duty for 4 years, and like I did, it's some experience. It's just something that it's hard to put in words. When I left, you didn't know what to expect. You knew there was a war going on. You knew you were going to be in it. Everybody at our age back then was going to be in the war, majority. And when I left, 3 months after I was gone, then I was on my way to Vietnam. I was on a ship. From the time we left till the time we got back, we spent 46,000 miles on water. And that's enough right there. You take a cruise for 3 days or 5 days, but if you take one for 46,000 miles, it's an experience. And it's something I wouldn't trade for anything. I think today, if the kids, a lot of the kids that's out here now, that's the meth people that I call on meth, the drugs, pills, if they had this experience, I know we were around it, but it's an experience that I think they could learn a lot from. I know I did.
Well, I started out with the question from the recruiters, can you swim? Do you know how to use a gun? Do you want to be a soldier? Yes, yes, no. I became a UDT, which is underwater demolition, because that was what was going on. They converted to SEAL unit after that. Went to flight school. Spent the first 26 out of 30 months as a POW. Came back, decided I wanted to go back twice. Went back 2 more tours. My reason at that time is not something I need to tell people, but all I want to do is go back and kill the gooks, which is, excuse me for that, but it's called payback. I broke my back on a jump, couldn't do the duties anymore, so I became a cop. I had a college degree with a secondary in criminology, so they made me a Navy cop. So I served that till I retired in '80.
Well, when I went to San Diego for basic. And then from basic, they sent us to Bremerton, right outside of Seattle, Washington, to get on a ship. And we got on the ship, and then we went back to Long Beach, California, for training to go to Vietnam, off the coast of Vietnam. I was on a supply ship. We handled fuel, ammo, bombs, food. We went to the Philippines, our home port, loaded up out of there, went to, off the coast of Vietnam. And we was beside a carrier one time, and we was putting fuel over on it, and we collided against each other and knocked one of the jets off of their carrier over on our supply ship in a prop job. And that jet was already loaded, ready to go fly a mission over Vietnam. And we was wanting to dump it over the side, and they wouldn't let us, and we had to take it back in Civic Bay to take it off on a barge. And it was real scary, because there was sparks and there was JP5 fuel running every which way. But I started taking pictures of the jet and started taking the bombs and stuff off of it. And they took some of our film, but we still got some of the pictures for it. And we had 2 cruises over to Vietnam, and I got out in '69. And I was a Christian when I went in. The good Lord took care of me and everything, and brought me back home safely.
Brent, one of my most significant moments came early in my tour. Actually, it came at the end of boot camp. And just a little background on that, I enlisted voluntarily, even though there was a draft going on, in late 1969, and went to boot camp in February of 1970. And during that time, I believe boot camp went about 11 or 12 weeks. And tradition was, at that time, the night before we were to graduate, the drill instructor would gather all of the enlistees in one certain location, and they would read off a list of where you were going to go, what your job specialty was going to be for the next 3 or 4 years, or ever how long your enlistment was. And so as I heard him go down the list, he called out my name and he said, 0300, infantryman. I went, oh no, no, that's, I said to myself, obviously, because you don't argue with the drill instructor. And I was stunned. I was shocked. This is not what I had in mind, because I had signed up in a program that had just started with the Marine Corps that was called an aviation guarantee. And if you scored high enough on tests, you could go into some branch of aviation in the Marine Corps. It could be a mechanic, a crash and rescue, supply, which is what I wound up in eventually. But I was stunned. And he finished the meeting, and I hadn't moved. And I thought, no, this is not right. And I'll never forget, there was a big, tall, strapping lad from Texas named Tom Brewster. Never forget Tom. Wouldn't know where he's at now. But Tom stepped up to where the drill instructor was and politely said, sir, you called out my name for an 0300 infantryman, and I had an aviation guarantee. He said, all right, Brewster, go over to headquarters in the morning and see if I can straighten it out. And I went, me too. And so he said, all right, you go with him. Of course, it wasn't all said and done then. If your paperwork wasn't right, it didn't matter what you said. And so we didn't sleep very much that night, but Brewster and I went over to headquarters the next morning, and they reviewed our paperwork and said, okay, we'll change it. I have no doubt that God had his hand over that situation. I wasn't afraid to go to Vietnam. It just wasn't my desire. And so I spent the next 7+ years in a variety of jobs in the Marine Corps, from aviation to MP to a recruiter. So I had a lot of good experiences.
I served as a military policeman from 1964 to 1967. I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky for basic training, and then to Fort Gordon, Georgia for military police training. And like Mac, I was older, I was 22, and I came on levy for Korea, and I had the opportunity to take a 31-day boat trip across the Pacific on the USS Breckenridge, which I found out later was partially sunk in Incheon, Korea. And on that trip, I give the Navy a lot of credit. We hit a typhoon, and that ship, the waves were coming over the bow of that boat, and the fantail was just a shuddering away. And I'll tell you, that was about the scariest I've been in my life. And I was never so happy to see land again. In Korea, I had normal patrol duties. I filled the training sergeant slot and administered the Helen Keller Orphanage Fund, which our compound sponsored. I was halfway between Incheon and Kimpo Air Base, probably 35 miles from Seoul, Korea. After that tour, I came back to the States to Fort Huachuca, Arizona. I was assigned to a stockade, and my duty was basically to deal with unruly prisoners. I'll put it that way. I also had the opportunity to teach the GIs that wanted their GEDs, English and mathematics.
Well, I was a little different than most people. I was 23-year-old when I got drafted. I'd been married for 3 years. And I got drafted in January of '67. And of course, I took my training at Fort Benning, Georgia. After that, they sent me to Fort Rucker, Alabama for aircraft maintenance, which the Lord blessed me there because I was infantry bound. But he sent me down there, and I took my aircraft maintenance training. We came home for 15 days, and they sent me straight to Vietnam. And of course, Vietnam's it's not no fun. It was a rough time over there. And Of course, the Lord blessed me, He brought me back, and I praise the Lord for that.
During that time, I had a deferment, and I was working 40 hours a week. I had to make money, and then I was going to school full time. I dropped out in the summertime, and next thing I know, I was drafted. I ended up in Vietnam. I was in 2 divisions. I was in the 1st, and I was in the 25th. My MOS was 105 howitzers. We normally would be airlifted into the jungle, and we were direct support for a battalion, infantry. I remember one story I'd like to share. We were told that that night that we would be ready to go in the morning, because we were going to go to another location and be ready in the morning. So we're always up. We broke down and got ready. And the next thing we know, we moved all that night in trucks, we knew we were heading toward the border, and we thought, well, we're going where are we going? We're not going into Cambodia. You know, we're not allowed to go. You know, we're not supposed to be going to Cambodia. And next thing we know, in the middle of the jungle, we go through this forest, and there's a clearing. And in that clearing, they had made a portable runway, a big, huge runway. Had C-130s coming in there. They had helicopters all over the place, and they pulled us right on the tarmac. And they told us, get your guns ready. We are going to be moving out in the morning. The helicopters will be here in the morning. So we started getting everything off the trucks, moved the trucks out, and next thing we know, we see these officers coming by. They were 7 chaplains. 7 chaplains. I hadn't even seen a chaplain the whole time I was in Vietnam. Now here we got 7 of them. They come in and they say, okay, guys, fellas, we want to tell you that you are going to Cambodia. They